am Denise Hummel, and I am the CEO and founder of RevWork. I have a degree in organizational psychology. I am also a former civil rights attorney and former partner at Ernst & Young, and I'm a serial entrepreneur. So we're here to talk about scaling gender parity through crisis. And as you know, times of economic crisis often signal trouble for women and people of color in all sectors and all parts of the world. There's also a great opportunity to galvanize the inclusion momentum that has begun, and I'll be talking about that. Wild has also shared with you on Tuesday, if you were on for the kickoff, that it has this gender parity meaningful change framework, and that it's committed to actionable learning, and so has asked us to talk about how to leverage new developments in technology to scale and sustain behaviors for the first time in history. So I'll be talking about that too. We'll start with a brief introduction so that you'll understand the journey that brought us here. I'll give you a few statistics on the crisis, particularly with regard to developing nations, since many of you are dealing with developing nations, and we'll then move on to the short-term impact on diversity and the long-term opportunity for inclusion. Okay, and I'm assuming the audio is good, or somebody would be calling or texting me. So, hopefully that glitch is gone for the day. Okay, so I think that you'll see that we're going to be sharing with you our dream relative to scaling and sustaining inclusion. And then we'll talk about a significant breakthrough in technology that finally gives us the opportunity to create inclusion, culture transformation at scale. So first, a few practical things that probably you already talked about when I couldn't hear the audio, but I'll tell you anyway. The questions and comments are being fielded through Q&A, as you probably know, not through the chat, which has been disabled. So if you wouldn't mind, we're going to do just a little bit of a practice here. And Jen, when you have a moment, unmute maybe and tell me a little bit about what people are saying. So first of all, I want to know whether you are leveraging technology to reinforce your diversity and inclusion initiatives in your organization. So if you would chat about that, that would be awesome. Second, if you've done that, was it effective? And third, if you don't have that tool in your tool belt, whether you believe your organization would be open to the idea of using a mobile technology tool to sustain inclusive behaviors. So Jen, just tell me if you're getting any sort of chats right now. And
yeah, we're doing really well. We have people joining us from all over, from Kansas City. We've got Nigeria.
Awesome.
We've got Kosovo. So keep those coming in the Q&A box is what we're using to communicate today. So
okay.
We've got people from Turkey, DC, all over the place.
Okay, I'm excited. That is great. Okay. Let me give you a brief introduction about our journey so that you have a sense for where we're coming from, a little bit of context. Our company journey started with my quest to make a very significant difference in transforming the concept of inclusion from a nice to have to a must have, particularly for large organizations and enterprise, entities that could lead by example and maybe be change agents for business globally. So my initial background, as I mentioned before, was in behavioral and organizational psychology, but then I was also the attorney who litigated the first class action under the Americans with Disabilities Act. I was really dissatisfied, to be honest with you, with the focus on regulating behavior. I wanted to focus on the opportunity associated with inclusion rather than the regulation or the compliance side. So I ended up developing a cross-cultural methodology that was the foundation for a consulting firm. And that methodology was non-ethnocentric and very objective driven, so business objective driven. And that became the foundation for my work in a movement called Peace Through Tourism, but also my work with conscious capitalism and the US State Department. So I ended up scaling that consulting firm to 65 countries, and I eventually sold it to Ernst & Young. And I led a division called Culture, Inclusion, and Innovation. And that experience opened my eyes to the use of technology to scale behaviors. And I wondered if technology could also be used to sustain those behaviors. So in 2016, I opened a consulting firm called Lead Inclusively, which still exists today. It's now a division of RevWork. And we went to market with the hypothesis that if we founded our methodology on behaviors that were at the intersection of inclusion and innovation, that we would finally prove out the connection between inclusivity and business impact. And we were right. So our methodology began to decrease attrition and increase employee engagement for key demographics like women and people of color. And with a winning methodology, we only had to solve for one more thing. And that was the sustainability of those behaviors, even though organizations really seem to only have the appetite for one-off trainings. But let's let more on that later. So our team consists of an invaluable mix of practitioners from companies from Intuit, to Uninet, and among many others. And our advisory board consists of top leaders and executive coaches, and they are not just advisory in name, they are actively involved in our success. So we are unbelievably fortunate. So now that you have that sort of backdrop, you know where I'm coming from all those different angles. Let's talk about the crisis now that we're all dealing with. We can examine the bad. We're going to examine the bad news just a little bit, and we're going to seek out the good news, and we're going to see what levers there are to pull. So, to put this in perspective, on March 11th, the World Health Organization announced that the COVID-19 outbreak was officially a pandemic, which is the highest level of health emergency, as you know. A growing list of the economic indicators made it really clear that this outbreak is negatively impacting global economy on a scale that hasn't been experienced since the 2008-2009 financial crisis. And then recently they revised those estimates, and stated that the current containment measures could reduce global GDP by an annualized rate of 24%, which is approaching, just for perspective, the level of economic contraction not achieved since the Great Depression. So in terms of most of you attending the conference, you know that this crisis has a particularly negative impact on the economies of developing nations that are constrained by limited financial resources and where healthcare systems could quickly become overloaded. I know this is, I'm kind of gloom and doom here. Just bear with me for a second. Much more worse growth outcomes, actually, gets worse before it gets better, much worse outcomes are possible if the pandemic and the containment measures last longer. So, and also if developing economies are more severely hit than predicted, or if widespread economic scarring occurs due to company closures and extended unemployment. So the question really is, what kind of impact will the economic and societal changes have on diversity representation, as well as the behaviors of inclusivity that drive the representation, both in organizations like yours, as well as for-profit, business enterprise. You may remember, if you attended Fiona's kickoff, the Wild's kickoff for this event, she shared that men and women start out equally with new ideas as entrepreneurs, right? And then only a handful of women make it beyond the $1 million mark in revenue. Well, in enterprise, we see with almost all of our clients that men and women start out approximately equally, but women rise to levels of senior leadership at a fraction of the rate of men. So it should come as no surprise that women are disproportionately impacted by this crisis. Now, I use the Q&A tab and tell each other why you think that is. Speculate a little bit. I'm just going to kind of keep going as this is ruminating for you. As a means of comparison, the Great Depression, for example, it developed gradually, right? First, it was a subprime mortgage crisis. Then it was a broader housing bust. And eventually it was a full-blown global financial crisis and recession. The coronavirus pandemic came on suddenly, right? It just hit the economy at full force in 1 month. And that's why some people are saying, you may have read this on, in social media or on the news, that it bears more resemblance to a natural disaster like a hurricane, an earthquake, or a volcanic eruption, but of course on a global scale, right? So let's consider the further impact on women. And Jen or Fiona, you can certainly interrupt me if you want to share what other people are saying. But I will. I'm sure they're seeing that as they're chatting back and forth. I'll just give you a little bit of perspective from my end. First, if you compare the Great Recession to our current economic situation, you'll see they're actually quite different. The most obvious difference is that the Great Recession was driven by economic and financial imbalance, while the current situation initially resulted from a health shock rather than an economic one. Okay, that's the obvious. But second, the industries that were most heavily affected were heavily male-dominated at the top, right? The most dispensable workers were female, principally, construction, tourism, restaurants, hospitality, retail, were the most significant sectors hit. And third, in the majority of cases, the increased caretaking duties and the homeschooling during the crisis statistically impacts women more, as caretaker duties generally do, right? I mean, this is also not a surprise. Further, the job losses due to COVID-19 and social distancing will disproportionately impact certain occupations and demographic groups of workers in positions that require less education and pay less than other jobs. So a lot of this is centrally on point to what you guys are dealing with. Since social distancing in some form is likely to continue, these demographic groups will bear the brunt of the COVID-19 recession. So you guys are on the front lines, clearly. But, and I promised you good news, remember, we're always looking for the opportunity. It's not all gloom and doom. There's actually a long-term positive impact on inclusion. And why don't you use the Q&A tab again to tell me what you feel that might be. And I'll just keep going unless I'm interrupted by the moderators out there. This particular crisis, which has at its core isolation and virtual communication rather than face-to-face communication and travel, it's created an entirely new opportunity for women and people of color that did not exist pre-COVID-19. So virtual work can actually level the playing field for many who were formerly excluded. And we'll talk about why. But basically only if we recognize it and we sustain the momentum. You know how we are, as people. We're going to go back to having, manicures if you do manicures, and visiting restaurants if you visit restaurants. Things are going to gravitate towards the normal if we don't take hold of this and really push on that momentum and keep it going. So. Number one, remote work is becoming normalized, right? So companies that thought certain jobs could not be done remotely are discovering that this isn't necessarily the case, right? The ability to travel will become less important to success. So companies are discovering that while travel can be a benefit, work still gets done without the expense of travel. That was a real eye-opener for me, who travels all over the world all the time. And now here I am sitting home, but stuff is still getting done. The non-primary caregiver, which is statistically male, has developed a greater understanding of family responsibilities. They're home dealing with more of these duties than they normally are, and that provides for increased empowerment of women in their home relationships. So that's going on behind the scenes as well. And then, lastly, leaders are realizing that they need to focus on behaviors that drive virtual engagement and productivity, namely inclusive behaviors, right? Think about what inclusive behaviors are. Those behaviors are going to drive the new normal. So taken together, these changes will impact the ability of women to have a more level playing field at work. Again, only if we harvest that momentum and we don't squander it. So let's talk about how we can galvanize that momentum. First, I want you to sort of just think about how we used to deal with emotions at work, right? We accepted the term professionalism as kind of a useful shorthand for positive traits like accountability, integrity, reliability. And then we kind of weaponized it, you know, whether it was a tool for conformity or as a filtering mechanism for social status, right? Like he or she wasn't a culture fit, so we won't hire them. And ultimately, we allowed the guise of professionalism to eclipse the emotional experience of being human at work. But as it turns out, pretending we aren't human simply doesn't work in times where we're forced to confront our human fragility. We have to either invest a reasonable amount of time attending to the fears and feelings of our employees, or we will squander an unreasonable amount of time trying to manage ineffective and unproductive behavior. So if we're willing to make that investment in empathy and understanding, excuse me, during these hard times, it's likely to pay off in dividends when we return to the new normal, whatever that will be. Second, we need to use methodologies that have actual business impact. So for decades in diversity and inclusion, we have not approached this task with the same due diligence that we would any other business problem, right? We've been told for years that we need to change the behaviors of inclusion for our leaders and teams, but we don't tell them what behaviors those are, or how to use them in the workplace, or how to embed them on our teams. And further, no one is resolving the fact that although inclusive behaviors do lead to nicer leaders and happier teams, they do not necessarily lead to teams that grow, innovate, and have a strong business impact. So as I alluded to before, 4 years ago, we engaged in a hypothesis. And that hypothesis was that if we married the behaviors of inclusion and innovation, that we'd have a winning combination. And if we focused on that for all of our assessments and training, that we'd be able to reduce attrition and increase employee engagement for the key demographics of women and people of color. And now, 4 years later, we have the data and the case study to prove it, and it governs everything we do, right? Because we're business strategists and we're approaching this in a business method, okay? So what does that mean in reality? Sounds exciting, sounds fascinating, but what does it really mean? So on a practical level for us, I'm just going to give you examples of 3 assessment questions that we use for self-assessment and 360s. Okay, so we used to use self-assessment questions like, I positively acknowledge those who speak up and offer ideas. Great idea, right? Extremely inclusive. But we now ask leaders to basically reflect on whether they positively acknowledge those who speak up and offer ideas, even if those ideas are contrary to the historic way of thinking. Do you see the combination? Do you see the inclusion with the innovation being sort of phased in there? We used to ask leaders to reflect on whether they seek out relationships with people who, who have differing viewpoints. And we now add the more active action of curiosity about those perspectives. I'm hoping that you're kind of seeing the layering and the difference in the approach. Okay, where we used to ask leaders to reflect on whether they consistently looked for diverse opinions on critical business issues, which is extremely inclusive. We now ask the same question, but we extend it to diverse opinions related to products, services, and processes. So enter into the chat bar why you suppose this is so important, if you would. Just think about that a little bit, about the subtle nuance of the difference. Okay. So now let's see how that manifests itself now in the middle of a crisis, right? It's fine to say all this in normal days, right? When we're all innovating, we're prosperous and what have you, but now we're in the middle of a crisis. You have to be alert for the pivot. And I would love it if you would use the Q&A tab to share, tell or share how you have pivoted. In the meantime, I'm going to alert you as to some examples. So for example, the opportunity, right? You may recall that Wild had to immediately pivot from a live conference to a virtual one, right? Fiona told you that during the kickoff if you attended that. And I'm sure at first that was a huge disappointment. But what ended up happening is that they normally get, from what I heard, I hope I'm remembering this correctly, about 400 people live turned into 1,200 of you who are here on this call. Okay, so they likely have learned, I'm guessing Wild may have learned and grown from that opportunity, and who knows what they will do with it. Maybe they'll have one live and one virtual, I have no idea. But if they're making observations, they're seeing the opportunity here. And then what about messaging? So Wild's messaging focus maybe has changed a little bit. You know, maybe their services have changed. I remember on the kickoff call, Fiona said that that they now partner with Ethical Coach, and they've received applications from all over the globe. So they're basically expanding their goodwill and creating additional exposure for the Wild network, right? So that's an opportunity. In terms of service, I'll bet that each one of you is likely hypersensitive to the needs of human beings, particularly in crisis, and you probably have already modified your services to adapt to the needs of those you serve. For us at RevWork, we're focusing on industries in the essential functions and recession-proof areas so that we can grow as a company, you know, with clients who still have budget. We have you know, most of our enterprise clients have frozen you know, POs. So if we hadn't done that, we would likely be experiencing severe economic stress. As it turns out, we haven't had to lay off anyone. In terms of product, I'll give you another example from us. We used our learning technology platform to develop a remote Teams virtual coach, you know, for the behaviors that are going to be necessary to support, you know, during this, you know, new normal, to return to normal levels of prosperity, in addition to the foundational product, which is the Inclusion Virtual Coach, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But our intention was to do something like profit center oriented, like behaviors and sales enablement, but we pivoted quickly because we saw that people needed the, you know, remote teams. So we pulled that out of the product lineup and behaved accordingly. So Jen and Matt, I'm going to pause now for questions before we get on to the next section, which is basically about the dream and how it's unfolded. So if you have any questions, this would be a great time to just field me a couple. Looks like we have good time to do that.
Yeah, Denise, I have 3 that I've fielded from our lovely attendees today, and it's been great interacting with everyone else.
Matt's on my team, by the way. Hi, Matt.
Hi, everyone. But yeah, I guess I'll start with these 3. First being, how do you know that your methodology that focuses on that intersection of inclusion and innovation actually creates business impact?
Okay, I'm thrilled that you asked that question, or whoever asked that question. A couple of things. So before we had the technology that I'm about to share with you, which is, you know, pure data, we had case studies, right? So what we would do is we go into our clients and we say, what are you trying to do? Well, you know, how will you measure success? How will you know you've succeeded? What baseline are you trying to impact? Now, you know, using the example of women, we have clients who have come to us and said things like, look, we're doing great, except for senior director women and above. We're having high attrition. You know, their engagement scores are lower. We would feel that this initiative is successful if you guys can increase employee engagement for senior director women and above by a minimum of 4%. We would feel that we were successful if we decreased attrition among that same group by whatever, 4%. And so that was the baseline we needed to hit. And so we would do what we needed to do, our assessments, our learning, or what have you, but we were alert for whether or not we were actually accomplishing what we needed to accomplish. Now we know that we succeeded because we have the case studies. Now with the new technology, you'll see the dashboard. It's unequivocal. So, but thank you for that question, Matt. Anything else? We have we're doing really well on time. Usually I'm behind, you know that.
Yeah. Second, we have, how do you balance opportunity with security? Quote, even a boat in a safe harbor can have the bottom rot out.
Oh, I love that analogy. Okay, now, I mean, that question can be taken a whole bunch of ways, but I know exactly, I think, well, I shouldn't say no. The way I take that is, there is a risk associated with this work, and there is opportunity associated with this work, right? And we're all, no matter what we're doing in business, we are taking calculated risks to achieve the opportunity. And you really have to galvanize the support of both above and below you. Get your stakeholders, surround yourself with stakeholders where you're actually getting their opinions and buy-ins on your initiatives, and weighing that against the possible gains, given whatever objective evidence you have. So, for example, we did a very extensive white paper on the research that we have done and why we are successful, so that when our clients come to us and say, how do we know we should engage in this technology or do this initiative, we can actually show them what the research is based on. So it's kind of, it's a tricky balance, but I think it can be maintained by being as objective as possible. Thanks, Matt.
And then Denise, we do have one more if there's time.
Of course.
So you said you were going to talk about how to sustain momentum with the use of technology. What do you mean by that? I'm assuming that means momentum in inclusion and innovation initiatives.
Yep. Okay, so that's a fantastic segue to the next section. So section of this presentation, Matt. So I'll move on, and I'm going to answer that forthwith. So first, let me give you just a little bit of background, right? I want to talk to you about a dream that we've had for a long time. It's been my dream for over 20 years. And it's always been that I wanted organizations and companies to address diversity and inclusion the way they would any other departmental function or business initiative, number one. And also to recognize that one-off trainings and event would never create organizational transformation at scale. Never. I know that because I was a partner in one of the largest consulting firms in the world. And I led the division of culture, inclusion, and innovation. And I was involved in some of the biggest transformations of the world. And what would keep me up at night was exactly what I just said, that we'd have well-meaning initiatives, but they were not sustainable. So as I mentioned to you before, until recently, we were Lead Inclusively, which was a full-service diversity and inclusion firm. And we were constantly frustrated by the fact that we had developed this winning inclusion methodology that was reducing attrition and increasing employee engagement among these key demographics, but the results did not seem to last over time. And we realized that we had to find a way to actually change and sustain inclusive behavior instead of this one and done training that we were being hired to do. Now, I've already briefly alluded to the reasons we haven't resolved the issue of gender parity. For those of you who are in departmental functions like marketing and operations and the like, you know how you deal with issues, right? You basically set specific goals. Then you design the strategy to reach those goals. You then decide what to measure, and how to measure it. And then you set milestones that would signal whether you succeeded or not. You'd then do a step-by-step action plan to focus organizational resources on the things that were reasonably calculated to accomplish the goal. And by the way, you'd be tracking the progress every step of the way, and you'd be optimizing your efforts based on data rather than subjectivity. So instead, with D&I, the vast majority of organizations will throw an ERG wine and cheese party, or do an annual unconscious bias workshop and call it one and done. And even with the companies that approach D&I in a manner that I would say is more reasonable, they're still not approaching it systematically. And that's the reason that you hear these estimates that it's going to take 212 years to reach gender parity. And to me, there is absolutely no excuse for that. So the second reason, last year alone, well-intentioned companies around the world spent over $70 billion on professional development training, 80% of which was never retained by the learner or effectively applied in the workplace. So it doesn't matter if it's a sales representative, sales rep trying to listen, be trained to listen to customers, or a human resource department offering diversity and inclusion training, that behavior will be an 80% fail. And you can see by this graph that it just diminishes from an hour after to 24 hours after to 4 days. It is all but dissipated. So when we researched the science of behavior change and habit formation, we learned that behavior changes and new habits form under certain conditions based on the neuroscience of the brain. Okay, it's that simple. So, and you can Google this. This is not rocket science. When the learner chooses to learn, rather than being forced to be a prisoner in an HR mandated training, the brain is more receptive to the knowledge. And when the learner chooses the subject matter they're interested in, because it's relevant to their immediate priorities, the learning is deeper, period. Second, when the learner has the opportunity to be reminded in real time about what inclusion looks like in a particular situation, like a meeting or performance evaluation or a hiring interview, in time to practice it around an actual event, that behavior actually begins to change, especially if that behavior is repeated over time. And lastly, if the learner has the opportunity to reflect immediately after the event when they use the behavior, the learning gets basically cemented, and new neural pathways of habit begin to develop. I mean, it's the reason that we're all told, to diary if you're dieting or going through a 12-step process. It's that reflection piece that actually changes habits and behavior, not being thrown information at you and being expected to take notes and potentially remember it at a later time. So we developed the only self-learning platform that's rooted in the science of behavior change, delivered during the actual day-to-day activities where the behavior can be put into practice, and in the delivery style of the learner. And when Fiona shared with me, the conference participants are looking for information that you can actually act on, our executive board decided to share our vision with you. As well as exploring some of our technology that is already used by U.S. enterprise and making that available to you through a partnership with Wild. I'll tell you about that in a moment. But meanwhile, we've already agreed that one-off trainings will never equate to change, right? But if the learner schedules help when they need it and gets tips right in time for key events that explain the context, et cetera, then you're going to see a change, right? So they'll read a short article on how bias impacts hiring on a commute rather than when they're dropping the kids off at school. Or they'll listen to the quieter voices if a text reminder comes, right before a scheduled meeting. Or they'll learn to check their bias at the door if they get that inclusion tip right before they open the door to the interview, and so on, and so on, and so on, okay? Now, perhaps more importantly, this is the back end that I'm showing you right now. The advanced data insights around user engagement can basically inform predictive analytics and organizational decision-making if the time in the app can be correlated to, for example, attrition and employee engagement. And it can be cut for demographics like gender, level, function, team, location, right? Isn't this sounding like Nirvana? This is my dream and it's now here. So anyway, So when the app is rolled out in the way we've designed it to, so that's with a baseline measurement, a webinar that talks about the 5 areas of where inclusion can be embedded. And by the way, those are meetings, performance management, team development, hiring, strategy, and planning, followed by the use of the app to coach and reinforce the learner's schedule and, and in accordance, with their learning style, which we don't have time to get into, but there's AI and machine learning embedded in there. The results are outstanding. So on average so far, there's an aggregate increase of 8% in female representation, 7% in employee engagement among female employees, and a 10% increase in female leadership at the senior management level and above. Voila. When we are systematic, we can actually make a difference. So Wild has basically requested, and we have agreed to provide many of you a free trial. We cannot offer this across the board, but we can offer it to the first 50 companies attending this conference who contact us. Each company will be limited to 20 users without charge, and the trial is good through the end of 2020. And Matt or Jen, feel free to put this in the chat if it makes it easier for everybody else. But I'm sure that you'll be, or somebody will be sending them an email. But basically, you have to have this code. Okay, so this code is for you guys only. This is not something that everybody has. And if it doesn't come through this code, you cannot take advantage of this trial. So please, make sure that you're aware of it. And then, if it's not something you're interested in, don't, your company cannot absorb technology in this way, contact us for something else, get our white paper or be in touch on LinkedIn. I am really active on LinkedIn. I love it as a tool to share thought methodology. So reach out to me, Denise Hummel, and let's keep in touch in some way, shape, or form. But Matt, we did definitely allow for a series of questions. So, and now that I'm not doing the actively involved in switching slides and what have you, I can also monitor the chat bar and include a few more things. I do want to leave about 5 minutes for Fiona or Jen to wrap up. But please tell me what the questions are, and I'll be happy to field them. It's all about discussion.
Yeah, so I have 2. One is just asking for more elaboration on how organizations are using the data you alluded to prior.
Okay, love that. In so many ways, so many ways. So on an individual level, a manager can check into the data portal if they see certain behaviors that they would like to see differently. I will just say they can say to a member of their team, I'd really like you to click into the virtual meetings. I think that you could be participating more. I think you could be participating less, who knows? And that particular section of the app is helpful, and then they can log in and see if that individual actually used it. So that's on the individual level. On the aggregate level, they can see whether decreased attrition or increased employee engagement or anything else that they're tracking is correlated in any way with the SIL score. That's the Sustained Inclusive Leadership Score. So they can see whether there's an actual correlation in order to measure the ROI and prove that it's actually making an impact. A lot of our clients are, going with a pilot group so that they can compare that pilot with the, with the non-users, basically. So that's another way. But the data itself will eventually be more powerful than even the app itself, because it'll be benchmarking. It'll be global benchmarking, basically.
And then another rather important question, Denise, which 20 people in this trial would you recommend organizations should target in terms of sharing?
What a great question. So, early on in this journey, or I should say early on in my career, actually, I was really trying to reach the hardcore, the people you read about in the paper, hashtag Me Too people, and, who really were, more than just unconscious bias, but actually actively abusive. And I realized over the past 2 decades that the chances of reaching those people are so slim. They represent a microcosm of society, a powerful microcosm, but a microcosm, and that what I needed to focus on were the people who were open and receptive to the idea, but who maybe were not understanding the business impact. And for those who actually did understand the business impact, to turn them into champions. So my first suggestion is to make sure that you believe that these individuals could actually become champions of change in your organization. The second is some sort of a discernible pilot group, so that you can compare their results with the overall population. So that would be the second. And the third would be, if it were possible, and this is not often possible, but if it were possible, then maybe across functions, so that you could see, how different areas were reacting, or across geographies, so that you could see the differing impact in geographies. We've even seen, even our clients that are domestic to the United States rather than global, we've actually seen a difference from, in pockets, in regional pockets, let's say the difference between Texas and New York, et cetera. So that would be my answer to that. And we can give more details. There is going to be, I believe, a demo at some point in the near future that Wild is going to host, or we're hosting. So that will come to life much more during the demo. But that's a great question, Matt. Thank you. Anything else? I see lots of chatting going on.
Hi, Denise. It's Fiona joining here.
Hello.
Hey, I'd love to share a couple more of the questions.
Sure, please.
One question from Jim Penny. Let me give you 2 questions just to know.
Hi, Jim.
Jim asks, shouldn't the target audience be primarily male? Then we also have a question from Mike Shanley. The app seems to help with behavioral reform for offenders and high-level employee to create inclusion. What does the app do for women and people of color to feel more comfortable in their workplace, have more of a voice, bottom-up changes versus top-down?
Yep, love it. So the answer to the first question is no. Believe it or not, women are just as biased as men. They may be biased in different ways. So that's number one. And number two, women don't always help each other. We have grown up, some of us, in an environment of scarcity, where we look at, well, if I help someone else, another woman rise to the top, then I, that might be my position, so to speak. So we have to be retrained. Some of us have to be retrained too. The second thing with regard to reforming the offender, no, not really, for the reasons that I just said before. If it's really truly an offender, reaching them, it would be nice, and we hope it does, but it may not happen. It's really, truthfully, the fact that we have found statistically that at least 2/3 of the leadership population in particular actually wants to be inclusive and does see it as a benefit. They just either don't understand it as a business impact to be important enough, or really don't understand what those behaviors are, let alone how to use them, let alone how to embed them in their day-to-day activities. So the results that we're seeing are outstanding in the sense, so think of Facebook, any app. No, not Facebook. I love Facebook, and I've loved it, the years that I've used it. But most apps, you start seeing, kind of a fade out of interest after 3 months. Not this one. At 3 months, you start seeing it move even more, because at 3 months, these leaders start seeing that the people on their team are reacting to them differently. If they're doing 360 assessments, they're getting better assessments. they're hitting productivity and efficiency levels differently. The whole climate of the team is changing. So yeah, that's my quick answer to those two questions.
Denise, let me go ahead with a couple of more.
Of course.
Firstly, from Denise Hinden, you got an amen, Denise. Many women prevent other women from excelling.
I know, unfortunately. Thank God not all of us.
Right on. And I'll just say, just in response to the question about, like, isn't it only the offenders that, need the app? When I started, I've had a little time now that I've been demoing the app because I wanted to sort of, check it out, screen it to see if it was something that we wanted to put in front of the WILD network. And one of the features that I'm using regularly before I go into meetings is just like a reminder about making sure I'm listening to quieter voices, because particularly when I'm working under a time pressure, one of my weaknesses is that I will be giving a lot of advice and talking a lot, which connects to one of our themes from yesterday, not being an advice monster. But I've just found that's very, very helpful for me to make sure that I'm being consistently inclusive in meetings. So allow me to own up to that. Let me go ahead with these two other questions. So from Laura Jagla, have you worked with many clients in the government? And if so, what trends have you seen in incorporating diversity, inclusion, and equity practices into large organizations? The second question from Tracy Baird is, this sounds like it would have international applicability, that it could translate well across cultures and geography. Have you used it much in other countries, including those with different dynamics regarding gender, religion, ethnicity, etc., than the US? What has that experience been like?
So I'm gonna answer both questions with a lot of authenticity, and I know that there are a lot of government folks on, but I will tell you that I have found the system of responding to RFPs for the government to be very onerous for companies that are smaller companies or who are outsiders to the system. So if there's anybody out there that would love to see this app serving the government, I would love to be in touch with you in order to make that happen. So that's how I'm going to answer that particular question. By the way, I should be clear that this technology is web-based and available in iOS and Android. So for those of you who do not use mobile technology, it is still an important tool, because the coaching sessions can be used just sitting at your laptop or on your phone, for example. The answer about other countries. So the app, and I feel like I probably should, let's see if I can show you. Okay, so on the back end, this is the app itself, by the way, just to give you an idea of the functionality of it that you'll see on the demo. But what I'm going to do is fast forward to the actual platform itself, because when I do, well, for one, you can see the dashboard, which is right here. But also you can see the back end of it. So that, yeah.
We can't see it right now.
Oh, that's too bad. Okay, let me stop sharing and reshare. Okay, thank you. I'm glad you told me that. Okay, so so here's the front end, right? Looks just like an app on your phone, like Facebook. We don't have time for a demo, but I will just kind of show you the interface so that you can understand. And it's very different on the web as well. But what I wanted to show you in response to this person's question about other countries is the back end, right? This is the admin panel. And in addition to this dashboard that you're going to see on the data, what I wanted to show you is you can get this platform as a blank slate. So you don't have to use our content, or you can edit all the content, your video assets, your articles, your checklists, and so on in the Learn More button, for example. But our clients are actually, so far, we have one client that has translated it into 13 different languages and localized it for 13 different countries. And we will be able to take advantage of that, because that was the way we designed the agreement with them. So we do have content that is localized for several different countries and several different languages, but I do want to acknowledge what this person has said. Diversity and inclusion, as you know, is experienced differently in every culture. So my roots are in cross-culturalist, right? That's the firm I sold to Ernst & Young, with a completely non-ethnocentric methodology. So the content has been designed to be non-ethnocentric. But having said that, it is impossible to make it completely non-ethnocentric. For example, our experiences in Japan, it is just unreasonable to be putting a strong emphasis on same-sex marriages and things like that. And if we do it, we end up losing the majority of people. So we have opted to not include that content. So we call this concept glocalization, which I'm sure you've heard. It's kind of overused at this point, but it means a global focus, particularly if you're a global organization or business, but with localization as necessary. And that's what happens. You cannot, for sure, just simply translate the material. You have to evaluate it from a cultural perspective and make sure that there's nothing organizationally or in terms of national culture that would become an impediment. Make sense?
Yeah. Tracy says, thank you. This resonates with how we work across countries and cultures as a global organization.
Great. Thank you.
So a couple of logistical notes, Denise, is we just have a few people, who want to make sure they understand the opportunity for the free trial. So
sure, of course.
Allow me to just say there's two, as next steps, as you're hearing about this technology that Denise is sharing, there's two opportunities to move forward. And I'll put my video on, so I'm don't have the voice of God. So great to see everyone. So firstly, I just want to really thank Denise and her colleagues at RevWork who have really taken time out of their work weeks recently to work with Wild and to shape this opportunity for people to experience the app, to see how technology can help scale up and adopt new behaviors in our organizations around inclusion. And as I mentioned, I wanted, I've had this chance to sort of personally vet the technology and make use of it. And I think it can be really powerful to support Wild's goal, to support organizations to take action on a lot of the information we've been hearing this week and a lot of the initiative and momentum that you already have going in your organizations around equity, diversity, and inclusion. So there's an opportunity to go to the link that was included in the Q&A box to get going with a free trial. We're asking for, this opportunity is open to 50 organizations, 50 companies. So we should have one person from each interested company to take the lead, because you will be able to share the app with 20 different users in your company. The reason we ask you to be coordinated around that is that we don't want, for example, 5 people from the same organization downloading the app, because you have this opportunity for 20 users. And we want as many different organizations in the global development sector to be able to experience this as possible. And we do have this limitation. The second opportunity is if you want to learn more before saying, yeah, we want to go for it. Next Wednesday, there is a 30-minute demo. So Denise and her colleagues will just do this great demo that'll really give you a sense of how you might use it, when you would use it, is it right for you? So if you want to learn more, I would encourage you to look at the link in the chat box and to sign up for that demo, that 30-minute demo next week. Denise, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, just that we will carve out an hour, just so you know, just so that we can stay on to answer questions. But if you only have a half an hour, join in the first 30 minutes and you will see the demo in more than enough time, and you can just hop off the call if you don't have any questions or you don't want to engage in any dialogue.
Okay. So Denise, let me just ask, I wonder, since we're kind of rolling on this now, should people have 30 minutes now, do you feel like you would be equipped just to jump into a demo right away?
Oh, you know what? That's a darn good question. Let me look at my calendar.
Okay. And
You never know, right?
Right. But you never know, because I know that like many of my colleagues, we're very focused on this now, and then we're gonna like move on to the other things on our to-do list. So on behalf of all of us participating, I thought I'd just ask that question.
Okay, I'm loading Outlook right now to tell you. I managed not to share my screen so that you don't have to see my crazy schedule.
That sounds great. In the meantime, if participants have other questions, you're welcome to kind of keep that coming in through the Q&A. We have a question here about, will the notifications for the first 50 organizations to demo the app be shared on a rolling basis? I think they will be shared on a rolling basis. So, you know, if you feel like, yeah, you want to get going, you're welcome to kind of move ahead to this link that you see and to go for the trial.
And the answer is yes, by the way, I can.
Yes. Oh, yes. Okay. Well, fantastic. So I think what I'm going to suggest then is, thank you so much for your spontaneity. Maybe folks in the Q&A box, do we have critical mass out there who's interested in just like going ahead and getting this demo from Denise now?
And we can do it again on next Wednesday too. That is not a problem.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, Marina, Jim, Linda, Christine. Yeah, they would love to.
Okay.
So I'll tell you what, I'm just going to hop off here, Denise, and just like, why don't you just keep rolling?
Okay.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Appreciate the feedback.
Okay. And Matt, can you do me a favor if you can reschedule my next meeting, because it is a non-essential vendor meeting and they will be more than happy to switch. So I just don't want to be rude to them. Okay. So everyone who is on, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner here, you can see what looks to be an app. I want you to remember, Facebook is also web-based, right? It looks like an app, but it's actually web-based. So don't let that scare you in case your organization doesn't have work phones and what have you. But in any case, when you click on this app, it will open up to the 5 areas where inclusion can be embedded on a team. And we know this from our empirical research with our clients. Okay. So if you were let's say a leader in an organization, you were about to hire somebody, you would probably click on hiring, kind of depending on where you are in the cycle. If you hadn't even put the job rec out, you'd probably click on attracting diverse talent to find out how not to filter out women and people of color in your job rec. Or if you were about to interview, you'd actually click on interviewing so that you could learn how to check your bias at the door and so on. So just kind of depends where you are, but it's based on the interest of the user and the applicability in real time, to the learning, as I mentioned earlier. And then if you go back, so I'm going to go back to the focus screen and I'm going to click on meetings. Why? Because, well, you'll see why. Because the top topic area is virtual meetings, and we're all dealing with this issue right now. We've had to beef up the content here about tenfold in the past several weeks. So if I click on virtual meetings, you're going to see where the magic starts and why we have the patent on this and why I'm so excited. And that is that the app is going to say, great, you've clicked on virtual meetings. When is your next virtual meeting? And it's going to have you pick a date and time, and where Microsoft is endorsing us for calendar integration. So we're right in the middle of that right now. But after the app congratulates you, the first thing that's going to happen is a nudge message that sets the context for the learning. So they're going to click on that, and what do they get? They get the actual opportunity for why it's so important, why inclusion is so important in the context of virtual meetings. So they will then at that point set it and forget it, because the next nudge message they get is going to be in real time right before that meeting. And it's going to contain some quick tips about how to conduct an inclusive virtual meeting, right? You'll notice at the bottom, they can also go to the full coaching sessions that I was telling you about before. We'll get into that in a second. But very quick, boom, 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 and it'll be top of mind. Even if every tip that you see on the screen is not useful, it will still be top of mind the second that they walk in there. So then again, they've said it and forgotten it. And right after the meeting, they're going to get their last nudge message, which is basically going to say, how did it go? And quick voice to text, or typing in, Sally spoke up for the first time, or this strategy worked, this strategy didn't. This journal is completely savable and searchable and personal only to the user. Okay. Now, here's another piece of the magic, the SIL score, the Sustained Inclusive Leadership Score. So for those of you who actually want a KPI, a means by which to measure inclusion, the higher the SIL score, the more interactivity they've had in the app, right? Certain amount of points for reflection, for practicing, for accessing different topic areas, for being in the app for more than 3 days in a row, their scores are going to go up. And you can track whether there's a correlation between actual inclusive behaviors, and team responses and the SIL score itself. Okay, so then what? Well, if they're not interested in practicing, they can still access the content in the self-serve sessions. So if you click on any of these, let's click on Overcoming Inclusion Challenges. Again, you're going to get that opportunity, but it's everything all at once. So you're going to tap anywhere to begin, and you're going to get those 3 tips. You're going to get, though, all at once also the detail associated with that. And you can click on the Learn More button that you see at the bottom. And at that point, you can get a podcast, a video, an article, or what have you. In this case, FedEx is using this, and it's their video. Why? Because this button is fully editable on the back end. And I think somebody needs to be on mute. Fiona? Never mind. I think I can mute her. I have power. I muted her. Okay. So you see the thumbs up and thumbs down right there. That's the machine learning, right? So if you're like me, I don't want any long articles in the middle of my day under any circumstances, but I might listen to a minute or two of a video. And all the assets are fully editable by the company itself. By the way, not in the trial version. In the trial version, you're stuck with ours, with our stuff. But if you were to move ahead, you would in fact all those assets are variable. So that's awesome. And I will show you that. And Matt, if you could field the chats so that people can ask questions, that would be great. Either maybe just let me get through it. And I can answer the questions at the end, or get an email address or something. But in any case, okay, so here we go. They are now they can access their notifications, which they can get rid of completely, swipe away, or revisit. That's especially helpful with one of the features that's coming up in case you miss one of the notifications. But you can click on me and see what you have bookmarked. You can click on company, or now it's called group, because lots of people want to do it in teams, and you can find out what other people are doing. That doesn't mean you have access to their journal or anything else. It's just that you get to see what they're interested in, and maybe you'll click on it and be interested yourself. Again, it's about keeping people in using this, right? It's all about engagement. This is the journal that we spoke about before that's fully searchable. And then you can, the user can go to their SIL score. They can edit their profile just as you would with any other app. And lastly, even if they do not want to practice, they don't want to engage in the self-serve session, they are still going to get hit once a day with a random active inclusion at a time that they have set that's convenient for them. Yes, they can swipe it away, but it's, the hope is that they will click on it, open it up, and it's just super quick. It's not anything that's onerous. And if they're really interested, they can click on the Learn More button and get more. But here's the back end. So for those of you who are interested in the, the statistical part of this, the data part of this, how do you use this to create business impact? A leader can log in and you'll see this dashboard, and you can see minutes in the app, by coaching session, by daily activity, by, location, gender, functional area, SIL score. Is it plug in your HRIS? Is it correlated with your pulse survey? Is it correlated with your inclusion index, and so on, right? And then this is what I alluded to before, is that now in this case, FedEx is using it for inclusion, sales enablement, and remote teams. So they've got 3 different things going. I think they're doing a blank slate, do it, build it yourself as well. But I'll click on focus areas for the inclusion app and topics. And then, okay, so you see meeting, hiring, team development, and so on. Those are the focuses. But let's say you didn't want that focus, or let's say you liked meetings, hiring, and team development, but not the others. They can just go away. Again, not for the trial, okay? The trial doesn't have that capability. But, you're dealing with our content on the trial, which is good because you're getting world-class content. You won't suffer from that. You'll get to see the mechanism, and you'll get to learn a lot. So it's all good. So if I go to meetings and I click on topics, do you remember I had virtual meetings, building buy-in, interpersonal dynamics, team meetings? You remember that, right? So again, click on the blue button, click on browse on your computer, video, publish, boom. And you have it customized. You can delete sessions, edit them, whatever it is you need to do. And then to add a coaching session, you just click on add coaching session if you have one from your library or from another program. So for example, if I was using this for sales and I had done inclusion across geographies, I could type in some keyword like geographies, and I would get inclusion across geographies. And I drag and drop it in. And I've given you a lot of the functionality here in this demo. Of course, you can manage users on batch, and there's a one-time password that, if you have a firewall issue, everything you can think of, we've thought of, because our founding client was the 5th largest bank in the nation. And so their GDPR and other technical requirements were over the top. And so we are, fully prepared. So, okay, Matt, I'm going to stop because I did see the chat going. Are there any questions? And just let me know.
Scrolling through, I'm not seeing any specific questions, but some very kind, positive feedback generally about the demo you just presented.
That is great. Okay, wonderful. Well, I hope to see you guys on the event next week. Yes, sorry.
Apologies, yes. we just got one in.
Okay.
Yeah.
No worries.
What kind of dashboard report is available to senior leaders?
So different admin levels, right? So for senior leaders, they will likely opt for the level that will give them aggregate data, because what their senior leaders are generally interested in knowing what the overall trends are, right? They're wanting to do predictive analytics. They're wanting this to inform their actual decision making for the entire organization. So they're going to want to see the comparison between the pilot group and the full organization, perhaps in terms of any trends, employee engagement trends, attrition trends, promotion trends. One of the things we're trying to do is get women and people of color promoted quicker. So anything they're tracking in an HRIS system, they can track here. And for senior leaders, it just kind of depends on what permission levels, how it's configured for you guys on the back end. Make sense?
And there's another question I can jump in with.
Sure.
From Jana. I'm joining from Iowa, where I'm temporarily located, but work in Jakarta, Indonesia.
Oh, wow.
I'm interested in learning more about customizing local content and whether RevWorks has clients in Indonesia.
Okay, so I'll tell you something. You probably could be our, our local talent in that area. So no, we do not have anyone there. We do not have a cross-cultural or diversity and inclusion expert there. However, what we have found is a lot of our clients actually have that talent in-house. And so we partner with them to make it happen. So if you're interested in that, contact us or Fiona, or come to the demo, or, give us, drop us an email at team@revwork.ai. I hope everybody remembers it's not .com, it's .ai.
Thanks, Denise. We have that in the chat box. And this person works with one of the large global development NGOs in our sector. So
I'd be very interested in your thought leadership and in sharing and growing as professionals.
Another question, how do you benchmark where the organizations or individuals are before you introduce the app?
Okay, well, I strongly suggest that you at a minimum, use our leadership inclusion baseline and action plan. It's a 13-minute, self-assessment or 360 that measures the, where that person is in the intersection of inclusion and innovation, and that you re-administer it after about 90 days to see whether you're seeing an increase. By the way, that instrument results in a report and action plan that gets pushed directly to their inbox within 5 minutes of completing the assessment. So that's one way. The other way is just think about, what is it that you want to be different? If you want employee engagement to be better for women or people of color, and then you need an employee engagement survey instrument. If you don't have one, you need to get one, and you need to put it in place right before this initiative, and then measure it again after the initiative. So think about, the first exercise is, what do you want to be different? If you tell me what you want to be different, I can tell you how to measure it.
Okay, great. And so we're waiting for that information to come in. There's a
Okay.
question mark about, from Jim Penny, please redefine SIL.
Okay, great. So SIL, we affectionately call it the SIL score, is Sustained Inclusive Leadership Score. Keep in mind that score is different for whatever use case this app is being used for, because now that it has achieved such success and inclusion, it's now being used for other things like remote teams, sales enablement, innovation, M&A integration, and the like, right? So the score, the acronym is going to be different, depending on, what use case it's used for. And the organization can also change that. So if you are, I don't know, Wild, Fiona, and you want it to be the WIL, the Wild Inclusion Leadership, whatever, I don't know. The point is that the name of the score is not significant, although we're very hopeful that that we're going to have a huge body of clients that will not change our content and that will use the SIL score, because that's the overall benchmarking, that we'll be using. And notwithstanding that, it is very obvious that companies need to use this the way they need to use it. Like, we have one huge multinational that is going to use it as the repository for everything D&I, including their D&I portal, their assessment, inclusion index, their means of communication. So we've had to do a very significant customization for them, because they want it to be all in one place, and I applaud that.
We have another question about interest in this being used in educational settings.
Absolutely. I mean, the content would absolutely need to be adapted. So in its raw form, in its basic form, and Fiona, I forgot to say this, I should have said this, in the form that we developed this in, this is very, much oriented towards someone who manages people. And Matt, we need to make that clear in any communication. That's my bad. However, having said that, again, blank slate or adaptation is possible, not in the trial version, but in the full version. My suggestion, by the way, is not to avoid, like, if you're a school and you're thinking, well, what does this have to do with me? I'm not dealing with leaders in companies. I'm dealing with teachers and principals and school psychologists. Don't let that dissuade you, because given that you can make the focus areas anything you want, the topics anything you want, and the content anything you want, the single important factor is that it's built on an business algorithm and business logic and machine learning that is meant to change behavior. So don't let that because this is an invaluable opportunity to see how that works. So if you're a school and you're thinking it's not applicable, I would take advantage of it anyway, assuming that it's not already full at this point, because I know this is going to go fast. But anyway, long story short.
I have another question, Denise. We may have kind of indirectly covered it, but it's just about how we go about benchmarking where the organization and user is before introducing the app?
Oh yeah, we did sort of touch on that. I think maybe this person is concerned about how do they actually, prepare for, before the introduction. And there's a whole, communications, we have communications, we have change management. See, we came from human capital, right? So we came from Ernst & Young. So we know about, corporate communication, organizational communication, and change management. We can help you with that. And we can also help you set up these baselines. We have all of this. We have videoed FAQs. We have, videoed onboarding. We have, a staff that will hold your hand. We have engineers who will deal with your compliance department. So I would suggest taking that question offline, because this particular person has some very genuine, things that they need answered. But I think a one-on-one would be a better environment for that.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, Denise, thank you so much for your spontaneity and being ready to just jump in and seize the moment. I'm excited to see that, organizations asking all these very thoughtful questions.
Me too.
So participants, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you joining us from the greater DC area, from across the US, and from many other countries. And please join me in a round of applause just thanking Denise and her colleague Matt for the thoughtfulness they've put into offering us all this free trial and for the information today. Thanks so much, Denise and Matt.
Thanks,
really
Fiona.
appreciate it.
I enjoyed the opportunity very much.
Become a member of the WILD community by registering for the Women in Global Development Leadership Forum happening virtually on October 26th. You can visit our website, www.wildleadershipforum.org, to register today. And a special thank you to our sponsors.